This next presentation picks up from Wendy's pre-conference workshop. In this session, we will demonstrate how to use the latest tools used to enable traditional Synergy UI Toolkit programs to move to a modern UI. Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, Nigel. I have got 60 minutes to basically tell you everything there is to know about UI Toolkit to WPF and beyond. Although titled UI Toolkit to WPF, I am going to go through in a bit more detail than I did the other day about the UI Toolkit framework that we've created, put together, and are expanding to help you move the traditional toolkit style applications with menu processing, input processing, and list processing to a WPF environment. A lot of talk has been about UWP, and I'll talk about why I talk about WPF as opposed to UWP at the end of the session. And that's when I'm going to talk beyond the desktop and outside of WPF and outside of the traditional Synergy hosting a WPF application, which is essentially pretty much all you can do with a UI Toolkit application if you want to retain that host traditional Synergy environment. So there are reasons for why we do what we do. As I've said, it's a helper class, the UI Toolkit framework that we've added to the Symphony framework. Symphony framework, when it was conceived 4 or 5 years ago, has always had the concept of helping you migrate from UI Toolkit to the WPF environment to add nice new features and functionality and cool looking UIs to your application. What I decided to do recently was extend that and help you with specific framework, the UI Toolkit framework, to help you more achieve those goals. By doing that, it helps to basically emulate what sort of main processing functions you've got within your UI Toolkit application. For example, menu processing, input processing, list processing. We can provide you with template boilerplates. The boilerplate is the bit between the fancy new .NET and the traditional UI Toolkit application. Everybody does it differently. There's no standard way of doing things. We've tried to help you standardize things. We've given you list methods, we're giving you input processing methods, and things like that. But half of you probably don't listen to us, and the other half do it their own way anyway. So the boilerplate is there simply to try and give you a template of how to go about this. But inside, the process is the same. When the UI comes back and says, I need something, the boilerplate then decides what you need and dispatches into your existing program to get you what you need. So, menu and toolbar processing, they are the cornerstone of a UI Toolkit application. If you don't have a menu bar, your application will not run. It's as simple as that, because everything is derived around menu entries. You can signal them from menu bars, toolbars, from code with msignal, etc. And the name of it represents the function, what you want to do. Now that may be a function that you want to create a new item, that you want to go into a particular area of the application, but it's also that the users press the cancel button or the OK button and the input form is complete, or they've selected an item in a list. Okay? So it's not necessarily just something that's derived from a menu entry on a menu column. Obviously, you set gselect and genam is going to be set to the menu name. So really, ideally, you want to keep the menu names in your new user interface the same. So you don't really want to have to start mapping between the new and the old. So here's a very quick example of how you sort of set up menu type events or structures inside a traditional application. You've got a menu bar at the top in script, everything else is in code from a toolbar button point of view, and a tab set having buttons on them. Then we're back to script where you can define buttons on input forms, and then we're back to code where you can define buttons on lists. Doesn't matter where those buttons, those commands, those types are set up, it's all the file new, etc. So we've got the menu names. That's in code. This is how we manhandle them to enable them and disable them. And obviously, these are the keys, the names, fnew, fnew, fnew. So we're using the same command. It'll do the same logic processing within the application, but we're defining it in a million different places. The menu controller, and there's an identical one for toolbar controller, and they are synonymous with each other. So one can be injected into the other, and they sort of both play together nicely. But the reason the two of them is because you'll get yourself into a I'm processing menus mindset and I'm processing toolbars mindset. The fact that they're both talking to the same command dictionary is immaterial. You don't need to worry about that. So we create a menu or toolbar controller and we give it the same name, fnew. And then we can start defining our nice XAML. WPF is all built around XAML on the user interface. So we can build our nice XAML menus and ribbon bars and toolbars and buttons and commandings and all that kind of good stuff and do whatever. It could be a click of an image. It will still fire the same menu event back in your host toolkit program. And we're using the same names, fnew. Whatever the menu name is that we're creating, we're using that throughout our user interface, because that's what's going to get signaled back to the host program. So there's a correlation then. We continue to sort of keep the same names. There's a few more here. This is a toolbar, and these are buttons, and buttons with images in, on and all that kind of good stuff. So you're vastly improving the user interface, but you're not changing the way that your program is expecting those commands to be given to it, or the naming of those commands. So the menu controller then, you have when you click a button, we will dispatch back to the boilerplate a TK menu signal, which is what the raised TK menu signal do. That's been in part of the Symphony framework since day one. And we've done all the logic to handle when that button gets clicked. So back in the boilerplate then, and again, this is the template code that you would have to take and adjust to fit your applications. A lot of it will sort of slot in, but there will be some changes required. So you'll add it. This is traditional Synergy. We're not in .NET anymore. We've come away from our .NET. We're in the boilerplate in our toolkit application. We're adding a handler that says when this event's raised from the user interface, this is the code to run. This is the method, structure, type of code to run. And in there, we'll set up how we then want to dispatch into our application. So we're going to set gentnam, gselect, etc. And then we've got what we call touch points. And a touch point is simply a way of us telling somewhere in a program where we want to go to. Because if you think you've got this long monolithic procedural program that loads input windows, does an input processing loop and then exits and closes files and all that kind of good stuff, well, you can't start at the top and work to the bottom anymore, which you would do if you're running it as your traditional toolkit application. Now you have touch points that come in and say, run the code but only open the files, and then exit, and then come back in again and run the code and process the menu entries associated with the input loop, and then you'll exit. And then you'll come back in with another touch point that says, close my files, because it's the boilerplate and the user interface now that's controlling what gets called and when. So you put these touch points in to dispatch into the relevant chunks of code inside your application. And I'll talk about those a bit more a little later on. We've tried to emulate, without trying to be exactly the same, we've emulated the same commanding and structures that you've got in your traditional program. So if you want to enable and disable menu entries and buttons, you can, because we've got the commands disable command, enable command. We've made them a bit more verbose, as opposed to m_disable and b_enable, because we're not talking about a button, we're not talking about a menu, we're talking about a command. The fact that that command may, in the user interface, be attached to a menu or a button, we don't know, and really we just don't care anymore. We are only interested in the fact that it is a command that we want to respond to by jumping into our program, using a touch point to indicate where, and run that little bit of logic. Okay? It's a nice way of stripping out the user interface and just responding to commands. So your mindset needs to move away from it's a menu or it's a button to it's a command. Oh, and by the way, it's called the same as what my original menu was. As I said, we've got the toolbar controller, which is identical in concept to the menu controller, and then you can inject that into your toolbar controller. And then in the XAML, if you really want to be, menus will bind to a menu controller and toolbars will bind to a toolbar controller, because you want to continue to think of them as different entities within your application. That's fine. The fact that both will execute the same commands is rather immaterial. But it gives you a sort of cozy feeling that they're still separate entities. We don't support generating menu columns at runtime and things like generating input windows and that when we get onto input windows. We don't support that. If you do that, you've got to change the way you work. You've got to create them all in XAML. But unlike the traditional sort of toolkit, when you create a command and add it to your XAML, it doesn't appear. You have to tell it you want it to appear. Okay? So you just set flags on the various commands to say, I want you to appear, I want you to be visible, but I want you to be disabled or enabled. So you can control all that. So the fact that your menu column might have 500 items on it, at any point in time you'll only be showing 4 of them, 5 of them. Okay? It's just a different way of thinking. You're not controlling it under the program. You should not think about adding and removing menu entries that are visible to the user in your code. You should ask for those entries to be made available, visible, invisible, but you should not code to add or remove them in your program. It's all to do with the user interface. Keep the user interface completely separate. List processing, it's ideal for getting your data into a grid or into some sort of tree control or some sort of hierarchical data presentation layer in the user interface. We have load methods. As long as everybody's using load methods, we are in good shape. Today, we define things in a window. The view of the list is going to be defined in a window. Again, we'll put that in script. In the script, we define the list class, which tells us how the list is going to be, where it's going to be placed, its load method, things like that. The load method will populate the list, and then we'll write code to go into a loop that says, well, else select this list until they either press a menu or they select an item in the list. So we define the window characteristics. 99.9% of the time it'll be a single line because unless it's, single line. And we don't do list input because that's never really worked in the toolkit. Has anybody tried list input? Does anybody do list input? 1 person, 2 people? Very brave. Very, very brave. Anyway, so you've got a single line, it's going to be an input only. Now, when you move to this environment, list input is well and true and sort of no problem. Then you've got a list class, tells it where it's going to appear on the screen, number of headers, things like that, and load methods. You can also say whether it's going to be a regular list or an ActiveX list. So, once we define the window and list class in the script, we're then into code, we load the window, we create the list, and then if it's a regular list, we're going to else-sect it with padding out the spaces for the headers. If it was an ActiveX list, we'd use the vertical bar to indicate the different columns. So, not ideal because we've now got UI code in our program, not really something we should have. I had to have it with the toolkit, that's fair enough, but in the modern world, with the WPF, we're not going to do that. We're going to define that all in the XAML. And then we're going to process it, and we're going to do a list select. And list select will either come back as they've selected something or a command or menu entry. The load method, we don't need to change this. The load method is quite a powerful and cool feature. We tell it what we want. We tell it that we want some data, and you give us back what you want us to display in the list. There's 2 things associated with list processing. There's the input window and the non-input window. And I was asked a very good question. Many people have the window data and the non-window data as the same thing. But some people have the window data as so much of a record area, and then the non-window data as the same, but then a few additional fields that you can do searching on, that you've got additional information. Well, we can't handle that of course we can handle that in WPF. A data object is code generated from a repository, but then you can extend it, and you can extend it with anything you want. So if your load method then puts data into the extended properties of your extended data object, they will either appear on the list, the grid, the hierarchical data presentation control that you're using, if you've defined that in the XAML, or they will be part of the sort of non-window data. There isn't really the concept because it's all there, but the sort of conceptually the non-window data of that visual control, so you've got it in your program. So we can handle that with blindfolded. It's not an issue. So in our XAML then, we're over in the user interface now. This is the XAML coding. So around here, we've got the item source. That tells us the data that we're going to bind to. So that's going to be our collection that we load through your load method, your list load method. Things like is read only true, can user sort columns. But as soon as you set that to yes, you'll be able to sort and do all that kind of good stuff on the grid. This is just regular out of the box data grid that you get with Visual Studio. The double click, these event triggers, they allow you to handle double clicking of an event and will signal the menu entry back into your program that says they've selected an item, they want to modify it, they want to look at it, they want to do something with it. We define the columns, so here we're defining what we're seeing. The fact that the data object may have 100 fields in it and we're only displaying 2 doesn't mean we lose the other 998. We have those, we're not displaying them. We have the data available to our program, we're just not displaying it. These static resources, they come from styles that are generated from the repository. So if you've got report headings, they will become the column headings and all that kind of good stuff. And we've got the bindings to the individual fields and how wide the columns will be, all that good stuff. So we have a couple of capabilities inside the UI Toolkit framework that allows you to generically call these load methods. You don't have to write code to call back into these load methods every single time. We've done it so it's generic, and it uses reflections to do a few fancy things, but essentially, ultimately, it raises an event back to your boilerplate code that says, I would like my load method calling, please. Here's the data I want you to return to me. Go away and do it. And it'll repeatedly call your load method. Now again, somebody asked the question, do we do paging like the UI Toolkit does? No, we don't. We could do. I'm not saying it's more than possible to put paging in and put it only load 20 at a time sort of thing. But things like your scroll bar and that just wouldn't work very well. So from a user niceness point of view, it's better to just say, let's get it all loaded. And if you're loading an awful lot of items, we can potentially put it on a background thread so we're not blocking the UI. And there's things we can do to help that kind of stuff. So now we're in the boilerplate code. We've come away from the .NET side. We're back in traditional Synergy. Looks very similar, doesn't it? We add a handler to honor the event of, I would like to call your load method, please. We're doing touch points. The program states.listLoad says, I want to load the list. We've passed through the same sort of item number 1, item number 2, so you know, oh, I'm item number 1, therefore I better open files. That's what a lot of list load methods do. The one thing you need to do is prevent the displaying of the window data as far as the toolkit's concerned. Okay? So we have a little flag in there that says, I'm running toolkit or not. If you're not, then you don't display it. So, we had a very simple example in the workshop, and I'm going to show you this example and run it because I've extended it a little bit. The toolkit list and took you into an input window, and now we've got the WPF list and we've got nicer buttons and all this kind of good stuff. It's exactly the same host program running, it's just now it's got a WPF front end. Input processing works very similar, defined in script, .input, .field. Ideally all repository based, because all the more information in the repository, the more information we can use with CodeGen to generate styles, to make the structure of your and the creating of your WPF input forms a lot easier. Same sort of thing, you put it in a loop and you honor input sets complete, break processing and menu processing. I've not got break processing on there. Most people don't use break processing as much these days, which is good. We can handle it, we just have to do a bit more additional work in the boilerplate to do it. The input window, it defines everything there is about your input, the fields you want to see, the prompts, not necessarily all the fields on the record area, more often than not, but you still have all that data available to you. Method processing like drill and change methods, validation rules that are built into the repository, so if you enter a value of 10 into a field that says you can only have it in a range of, 1 to 3, it won't let that value go through. So in script, we define the input window, we create it in script, and we load the window into our program. In code, we load the window. More often than not, we'll potentially add it to a tab set because We've got limited real estate on our 24 lines by 80 column wide programs these days. And then we'll go into a processing loop. So we'll wait for them to do the input, and then we'll respond to, is it set complete, or have they selected a menu entry? They may have done save, and you'll go off and validate records and all that kind of good stuff. The new way, we're going to define our user interface in XAML. We're going to use styles. The styles are code generated from the repository. Exactly the same concept as a script file, this. You've got all that information in the repository, and you do dot field and the name, and everything from the repository, and then you'll put a position, okay? So field pos and prompt pos. And everything else comes from the repository, like the prompt, like the type of field, like the type of input, all that kind of stuff. It's exactly the same concept with these styles. Everything comes from the style, okay? So you're simply saying, I want a field control, and here's where I want it. You tend to use grids and columns as opposed to physical positions. You can use physical positions, but it doesn't work very well. And then you say, oh, and the style for this field will be based on this input style that I've just code generated. So part ID style, part group style, part supplier style. Okay? Those are the individual fields. That style is a regular text box for alpha, you'll get a regular text box. If it's a date, you'll get a date picker. If you've got selections associated with a field, it will be a drop-down combo box. If it's an alpha 1 that you've said I want to see it as a checkbox, it'll sort of marshal it into a boolean, and you see a nice little checkbox in there. You don't write any of that code. It's all code generated based on how you've set the repository up. Remember my number 10 of my top 10 yesterday, the repository? The more you do in there, the more your life becomes easier further down the line. So, we've got this data object. This is the same for list processing and input processing and all that kind of stuff. And it's the connector between your existing application and the WPF world. And we've added capabilities into the data object, built them in, so they form a similar sort of structure to the way you're used to doing your toolkit development. So you may do an I underscore init. Well, instead of I underscore init, we have init data. Just exactly the same. It'll go through all the fields and say, you're an alpha, so I'll put spaces in you. You're a decimal, I'll put a 0 in you. You're an integer, I'll put a 0 in you. We have this Synergy record that allows us to move data from our program into our data object in the form of a full record area. So although the data object exposes these nice properties to the user interface of all the individual fields, back in our program, we don't have to say data object dot field 1 is this value, field 2 is this value, field 3 is this value. That would take a lot of coding. So this Synergy record says, here's a Synergy record, you sort it out. And the data object will go through and say, well, you're an alpha, so I'll put you there. You're the bit of the date field, so I'll put you there. You're the alpha 1 that wants to be a boolean, I'll put you there. And that Synergy record is two-way. So you can put data into the data object, and that's how you get data out of the data object in your record format. Because your program's still working in records. You can enable and disable fields. So you can do set processing as well. Many applications will have an input window, and they'll have an all set with all the fields on. They'll have a key set with just the top field, and they'll have a data set for all the others. Because if you're in new, then you'll input into all. If you're in modify, you'll only input into the data set, because you don't want to allow them to change the key field with them modifying the record, because then you'd get errors. So we can still handle that style of processing using these data objects. Set field enable state and set field read-only state. They'll accept a field or a comma-separated list of fields, or they'll accept the star all star syntax. Just like I enable set, I disable set, I display, and all that kind of stuff. It sort of follows that sort of pattern. Set processing then, because of that, just like you define sets in your input window, we have no concept of sets in the XAML. So we do this in the intermediate view model. And we say, well, okay, if you've got a set called new, that means all the fields. If you've got a set called modify, that means just the data fields. So conceptually, it's identical, but coding-wise, it's slightly different. Validation. We don't do the validation in the same sort of way. You can do. It's not that you can't do this. It's just not the sort of done thing with these applications anymore. We still call your change method, but instead of the change method putting a big halt there, don't go anywhere, you are not doing what you should do, I'm telling you that from an application point of view, your data is not right, message up on the screen, which is a bit harsh. You can subtly say, you know what, you've got that a little bit wrong. I'm going to let you carry on, but please come back and enter, tidy it up, fix it up. Whenever you're ready, there's no rush. You can't carry on processing the form until you have done, but I'm not going to stop you in your tracks. We still call the same change method, still do the same validation, but in the UI Toolkit way, we would do a uMessage, and I'm not going to show you what the equivalent is. Yeah, I thought it was on that slide. I do apologize. So there's the change method validation logic. So you're going to read a record. If it exists, you're just going to carry on and do nothing. Life is good. If it doesn't exist, you're going to stop them in the tracks and say, ooh, details not found. As I say, a bit harsh. The data object has a execute change method event on it, which again you can bind to in your boilerplate code. So you will raise the event back to the boilerplate. This is still in the .NET side. Now we're back in the boilerplate code. You add the handler for your change method. You xcall xsubar it. And you can, in there, you have an alternative notification. So instead of putting a uMessage back up, you actually tell the data object that the field is not valid. And let the data object work with the user interface to tell the user or tell the consumer that may not be a physical user. I know it will be in a WPF environment, but as you'll see later on, it may not be a physical user. So you're not coding this is how I want the message to be displayed in your program. You're simply telling the data object that data is not valid, and here's the reason why it's not valid. You do something about it. You don't need to worry about it. The XAML, the user interface, will do it. So before you had this, where you've got the stop them in the tracks, now you've got this nice little red area, and if you hover over it, it says non-blank 0 required, or it'll say invalid group ID, or whatever, invalid supply ID, whatever information you've given it. So this is a real-world application. The guys from AgTrax, this is a toolkit application, really good, really powerful, fantastic application. Has some drawbacks, not because of the way they've coded it, not because of the way they've designed it, but purely because of the way the toolkit has made them write their application. It's because they've got used tab containers, and it's the only way you can do. But essentially, you've got a tabs container, and if you select an item in this program, I'm going to run this in a minute, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. But once you select an item in there, it'll take you, for example, to the ticket tab, the third tab. Okay, that's great. But what's on the commodity tab? Well, I can't see that, so I've got to go to the commodity tab. Once I've selected an item and seen the ticket, I can't actually get back to the scale ticket list tab because it blocks me. Because it says, no, you can't do that. You've got to finish what you're doing before I take you back to look at something else. Okay? As I say, it's not AgTrax's fault that that's the way the application runs. It's the toolkit way of doing things. We've changed that. And what we've done is used Infodristics. It's exactly the same code, exactly the same logic, exactly the same data, but with a completely different front end. We've got a ribbon control. We've got an Outlook navigation bar at the side, so we can move around the application a lot easier. We've got tabs that we can move and dock. So those tickets and communities, we've now moved them over and docked them on the side. If we navigate through that list, the information in the tickets and the commodity, they're all changing and visible as we're moving through. The grayed out, okay, they can't go and edit them until you double click on an item and say, I want to make changes to this. And at that point in time, the scale list becomes disabled because the toolkit program is forced to say, when you're in edit mode, you can't move around the list. So we've had to keep that sort of approach to be in line with the application, the way the application works. But we can still move around before we get into edit mode. Okay? So it makes a big difference. And of course, with Infodristics, you can change the theme by the click of a button. So what have we got then? Down at the bottom, we've got our data in our myriad of ISAM files, database files, flat files, XML files. Doesn't matter where the data is coming from. You've got your application code, traditional Synergy. It's a toolkit application. No, it's not. It was a toolkit application. Now it's a cool application. We've got this boilerplate code on top, okay? That's the connector between you and the outside world, this WPF. Now the WPF is model view model. It's got a view with the XAML. It's got view model in the middle that's exposing your data objects. All that kind of technology is all up in there, in Synergy.net. But the controlling process here is our traditional Synergy application. It's using the .NET API, hosting our new cool user interface. And our application responds to the events from the user interface as and when they occur. A couple of things here. As I said, it still runs as a DBR. The second important factor here, although this presentation is targeting the UI toolkit, this abstraction of concerns between the user interface and the application can be any program. It can be done for any non-toolkit and toolkit program. The fact that we've got a menu controller, the UI toolkit framework that we've added is specifically targeting, I've got a toolkit application that's got menus and toolbars and buttons. The Symphony framework as a whole, at its core, handles everything what we're talking about here, even if you've not got toolkit. Don't sit there thinking, oh, I can't do any of this. I can't put a fancy front end onto my traditional Synergy application because I haven't got toolkit. That is not the case. And all you're doing is saying, I take out my user interface and I will replace it with touch points in the code so my new interface, whatever that be, can come in and execute that logic. So I'm going to fly over to my virtual machine that is over here. This is the AgTrax application. Get a nice little splash screen, and here you go. You're into the scale interface. This project, what happened was, we got together with AgTrax. They sort of said, well, we want a new interface, and I said, right, you give me the whole development environment. I had a 3-hour, 2-hour video call with Gail, one of the lads, the top guys, and he went, right, this is how you run it, this is what it does, this is why you do it, any questions, no, goodbye, and given a week to change it, which I did. And if we sort of highlight one, we can look at tickets and commodities and all that kind of good stuff. And as I say, I can now not get back to the scale ticket till I cancel. I can change filters, so I can go onto this tab and say, okay, I only want to see things. Where's corn? So I put corn in there, and I'll do apply. And now we only see corn. I can select that and all that kind of good stuff. That's the traditional toolkit one. The way we went about it, and I do this primarily for my benefit, in that if I do it using this flag, then it means I can carry on running the program, both toolkit and non-toolkit. So I'm going to run the same program again, but this time, instead of the toolkit, I've now got the Infodristics version. And once we're in here, we can do things like grab the ticket screen, and we'll dock that over there, and we'll get the commodities, and we'll dock that over there. And you can see that that's a sort of input form, and we've got multiple columns and fields across. Most of the time you'll sort of shrink these down. If we shrink them down enough, then the format changes into a list of fields, and we sort of put different colors on different lines to sort of highlight that kind of thing, just so you can fit a bit more real estate down. Factors we can drag down and put down there. And then as I'm clicking through these, you can see that the data in the windows is changing. Okay? So I'm able to see everything. I can still filter. I can go onto the ticket list and I can still filter, and I can say, okay, I only want to see the corny ones. Instead of having to scroll down, I can say, oh no, I can type in here actually, can't I? I can do that. So now I can select that one, and I can do apply. And now I only see the corny ones. All that kind of good stuff. And at any point in time, unlike the toolkit one where you had to go back to the tab to clear the filters, you can do a restore, and it brings back them all. We've kept the original program. So as I say, we're still in traditional Synergy. I can still go off and do printing. And you get your reports up, so you can see we're still in the same traditional program. We've not broken anything with regards to that. I can create new ones. When I do, I bring up a separate window. And this is when I was talking, I've mentioned object validity. If I hover over this, it's going to tell me product not found. But there's an indication that there's something not quite right on that form. It doesn't stop me going on to the other tabs. But at the top of the tabs, I can indicate that, hold on, this tab isn't complete. This is why you will not be able to commit this. So that field is product not found. So this is the field that's in error on that tab, and this is why it's in error. Okay? These are the sort of capabilities that WPF will give you. So that's your traditional Synergy hosting.net. Okay? I've used the Toolkit application as an example. But what we're doing is we're able to sort of service orientate our applications. Because our application now, in theory, the core application doesn't have any user interface. So if that code, now we've stripped out the user interface, can be written in Synergy.net, that gives us a whole host of opportunities. So we can take the code, we can build it in Synergy.net, and we can put not only a simple WPF replacement, but we can do a lot of additional things. We expose the contents or the capabilities within our application using these same touch points. Okay? So everything becomes callable, everything is directed via a touch point to the particular bit of logic you want to run. So we're not saying take your big program and split it down into 15 billion subroutines. We're saying leave your program and inject a touch point that says, actually, I want to just drop down here, please, and I want to drop down there. Now, there's a couple of things you need to do. Do you need to think about static data or as opposed to stack data and things like that? But we can handle all that for you. And as long as you suppress all the UI, which is what we've been doing in the last few examples, life will be good. Then you can expose those chunks of logic using methods and making those methods secure. And then the client has no knowledge of your application. He doesn't know whether it's Synergy.net, C#, a database. It's got no idea whatsoever. So these touch points then. These are a couple of examples. I'm going to move away from AdTracks now and a different example. These touch points, they're not predefined for you. You define them, and each program has its own set of touch points. So null might mean, I don't know what I'm doing here at the moment, but you've got things like open files, load units, process action, close files. Those are the four main things that original program does. And I need to not do them all sequentially. When I run the program in its traditional form, I would open the files, I would then load units, whatever these units are, I would then process some action, i.e. processing the units I've just loaded, and then I'll close the files. How it does all that, I'm not bothered about. What I've done is define the touch points that says, I can call you and I just want you to open the files. I don't want you to do anything else, just want you to open the files. And I will call you again at some point in time that says, I want you to load units. And I'll call you again at some point in time, maybe many times repeatedly, that says, I want to process an action, process an action, process an action. And then at some point in time, I'll call you again and say, close the files, thank you very much. I might call you again to say, open the files and do all that process again, but that's immaterial. So you code what those actions are available inside the code. So you also need to know how the code is being run. Is it being run as your interactive application, or is it being run as what I'm calling here as a service? Again, this is not hardwired, this is flexible, you code this. And then we use these parametric macros that allow us to have simple coding in our application. So if you see a if do open files, that means I just want you to open the files, please. Okay? But you don't see touchpoint equals program touchpoint dot null dot open files, blah, 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 blah. So you modify your program. If it's a program, you'll change it into a subroutine and have the mainline program just call into it. So 1-line code change, 2-line code change. It's not difficult at all. And then you'll inject into that routine what you're wanting to do and who's calling it. Okay? If things like view models are null, well, just make sure you don't go near that code. So here you've got the conditional code, running as a service and do process action. So I'm running as a service and I want to do the process action. I'll call action. Okay? So you're calling into the routine and then dispatching to the specific block of code that you want to execute. You can use the passed-in data. So here, if I'm running as a program, then I'm going to call the screen handling routines, I'm going to call a window entry routine, and I'm going to move the data into the local variable PRJ. If I'm running as a service as opposed to a program because of my touch points and my entry type, I'm going to ignore all that and I'm going to take the data from the view model. The view model has come from somewhere else. Could be WPF, could be something else. I don't know and I don't care. I just know that the view model has got the data in that I want to have inside my program. So I'm sort of injecting the data as I'm going through. Once you've got your application in this service-oriented environment, you then create, and we're getting into the Symphony Bridge and Symphony Harmony areas here, you then create methods to expose the particular logic. So I've got a method called getUnits. Now under the hood, that may call open files, get all the units, I'm not sure what it's going to call here, other than, well, it's going to call load units. It's going to return a collection of BRDIDX underscore data. Well, that's a data object, and it's going to return a collection of data objects. The reason it's called BRDIDX underscore OO is because that's what the repository is called. I don't change the names of repositories. I could change it, but by changing it, when I'm working in the UI, I will have to have some sort of cross-reference that says, units is actually a BRDIDX underscore OO. Okay, I'll live with the name. So I've got this unit, I've attributed it with method security true, which means my Symphony Bridge and Symphony Harmony can call through to it, and then I'm dispatching it into the original program. Obviously there's code in the class that says, the first time you come in, I'll open the files and all that kind of good stuff. And Symphony Bridge handles all that. It creates the instances of your application for you within application domains. Then on the client, and we're not sure, I've not said what this client is yet, I've just said on the client, I can call through Harmony directly into my routine and thus directly into the program. It looks a complicated single line of code, but it's not a complicated single line of code. It's simply saying the exec is, that's a standard procedure call in SQL, and we stick with the SQL type structure here. Application library, housekeeping, get units. That's your method that you want to call. The data that comes back is going to be a BRDIDX underscore O underscore data. That type of and to list, that's just a way of converting the response to a list that can be bound to something on the UI. Don't worry about that. Yeah, it's C# as opposed to Synergy, but it could be Synergy. Don't think you can't do this through Synergy. You can do it through Synergy and C#. But what this is now giving you is your data at the bottom, the same application, albeit you've taken it out of traditional Synergy and you've built it into assemblies in Synergy.net. But you know what? It's the same language. Yeah, there are some things you have to tweak and change around depending on how you've written the code. But it's the same language. It's just the compiler targets a different runtime. It targets the .NET runtime as opposed to the DBR runtime. That's all it does. It's not magic. It's super, but it's not magic. You've got your bridge methods. Your bridge methods are similar to the boilerplate. Okay? That's the way we're going to communicate between the two. Once you've got your bridge methods, then Symphony Harmony clients can consume those from anywhere you want. Be them a device, be them a web page, be them a phone, be them whatever you really want. I'm going to run a program here. Okay, so this is a program. It's a traditional Synergy program. It's not UI Toolkit. I can put a 4 in there, and I get back all the units. Okay, this is resort thingy. This is an application we have. And if you page up and down, you can see that some of them are blue and some of them are black. And if you click one, you can say, change the status. So is it clean, dirty, and all that kind of good stuff. Okay? So this is a web front end, and it's going to call through exactly the same program code that you've got here with the same sort of logic. And you get the it's a single page application. It's just a bit of JavaScript that allows you to put all these things up and change the colors and all that kind of good stuff. And you can click on a button and you can change the status of it, and it's all fancy dancy. And if you cancel them or commit them, it goes back to the form, and all life is good. And that's using that one line of code essentially to get at all those units. I've got another couple of quick demos here. First of all, I'll run the pre-conference workshop. That's the toolkit version. Life is good, doesn't it look wonderful? Let's make that different. If I take the E off, it's not valid. It's not told me it's not valid, but it's not valid. If I tab away, I get this nasty little message down here that's saying, well, what you're trying to do is now invalid. Don't like that. So, as I say, we've changed things, and if we change the ini file, true, and we save that and run it again. Now we get the WPF one, and now if I change that, it immediately tells me that I've got something wrong, and if I hover over it, group details not found. If we put it back in, the additional descriptions are now displaying, so that's where I've extended the data object, so you now see the additional descriptions. Life is good. One other quick demo. There's been a lot of talk about UWP. UWP is great. You've got all the touch and all that kind of stuff. One big reason I talk a lot about WPF as opposed to UWP, you cannot host UWP in a traditional Synergy application wanting a new front end. Simple as that. We can do everything in UWP, we just can't host it in our traditional Synergy program. So if you want to replace Toolkit with something nice, it's got to be WPF, not UWP. But that doesn't stop you having this bridge layer to something like UWP. So this is a UWP example here. How do I know? Because it says Universal Windows. This is not going to be pretty. This literally took me 20 minutes last night. Anyway, I'm just going to run this on my local machine. It's simple. I know it's simple. But we can just move through. And it's just to get that information. That's the XAML. That's all I wrote on the user interface. I literally copied and pasted that off an example. In the view model, because it's still MVVM and all that kind of good stuff, that's where I said, this is what I want to see, and put it into this list. And that's all I did. And expose it as a property down there so I can actually bind it to my flip viewer, whatever it's called. So that's UWP. If you want to go UWP, you can. But you can't host UWP inside your traditional Synergy applications, which is why I talk a lot about WPF, because WPF you can. Okay? Well, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your conference.